We've had a look at Micheál Martin's words in regard to this issue, and we've had a brief look at Simon Harris's. So now let's have a look at Helen McEntee, okay? So we let her speak.
Also establishes a new solidarity mechanism to ensure the fair sharing of responsibility across the EU.
So we are entering into this pact as a show of solidarity in order to do our fair share across the EU. Who decides that? Who decides what is the fair share of each individual state? Because as far as I understand it, EU law trumps national law, which means that the Irish government cannot introduce or enact a law that is in any way oppositional to what the EU is proposing. And if they do so, the EU can veto that law. So already Helen is telling us that we need to do our bit for the sake of fairness across the EU. However, the reality is we are already in an unfair situation, because as a nation state, if you look at it like households, Ireland is its own individual house, and in the neighbourhood you have the rest of the EU, and each of these nation states or states are their own individual house. So what's after happening here is Ireland as an individual house no longer gets to decide what goes on inside of its doors. The rest of the neighbourhood gets to decide. And Helen is trying to push us further into the grasp of this under the guise of fairness.
Annually how we opt into that. It is not true to say that we will have to accept 30,000 people every year, which is what has been said by deputies in this House and senators, nor will we be fined hundreds of millions of euros. We will be asked to accept.
Okay, now what she's saying here might have some semblance of truth to it, but it doesn't negate the point that she's also making, okay, or going against. So she's saying that we will be entitled to opt into this, but we will not be forced to take in 30,000 people a year, and we will not be forced to pay hundreds of millions if we choose not to do so. That might be correct. However, there's nothing to say that we won't have to take in up to 30,000 people, or we won't have to pay potentially up to hundreds of millions of euros worth of fines. Okay? So she's kind of being a little bit bendy with the truth here. She's been super specific in the number she's using, because she can then go on to say if we're forced to take in 15,000 people, that she was telling the truth, that we weren't forced to take in 30,000, but it was only 29,410. Okay? So she's been a little bit slippery here with the truth. And the fines then, of course, who knows what they could be. And so we'll go on.
648 people every year will pay a financial contribution, and that decision is completely up to us.
Like the nonsense of this. So she's telling us that we will only have to take in 600 and something people a year, or pay a financial contribution, okay? So a contribution is something that you offer of your own free will. She's saying that we can opt into this thing. But then she gives you the false dichotomy. So which we're going to be landed in if this goes ahead. So it is, while we're perfectly free to do as we please, the options that surround our freedom are this or that. So we can either agree to take in these people, or we will pay a contribution, okay? Which would be a financial penalty if you're reading between the lines here.
To change those figures, or that overall system would have to be agreed by all justice ministers right across the EU. Really what this does is show solidarity with member states. We think of those on the front line, but there is an unprecedented number of people seeking protection along their shores, Greece, Italy. We have to show solidarity.
We have to. Who's making that declaration? Because the bulk of Irish people don't want anything to do with this. And she's saying we need to show solidarity. What do you mean by solidarity? Is solidarity that we take in per capita more people than the rest of the countries? Is that fair? Do we pay more towards the banker bailouts than the rest of the countries? Is that fair? Or we don't get to enact any laws nationally that would be, I suppose, counterposed to EU law? Is that fair? And again, if we accept that this is all lovely and fair and we need to show solidarity because of what's happening in other countries, there's a lot of Irish people that would ask the question of, who cares? Who cares what's going on in Greece? Why should we be saddled with burdens to our system, burdens to our culture, and burdens to our society because of what's going on thousands of miles away? Because after all, we're an island people. We have that mentality. She would try and tell you that this mentality is, or Micheál Martin might suggest that it's a backward vision of sovereignty. Okay, whatever, he can have that opinion, but a lot of Irish people don't hold that opinion, nor do they have to hold that opinion.
To show support. Of course, we're not waiting for the pact to introduce changes. Already, I've doubled the number of staff in the International Protection Office. That's tripled the number of decisions with further increase planned for this year and next. I've introduced fast-track processing in November of 22, as I mentioned earlier, 50% reduction in applications from those countries. I've suspended visa-free travel for certain refugees and added more countries to the visa-required list.
Listen to this now carefully. So the argument was previously that we need to sign up to this EU migration pact or act, whatever, because it will allow us as a nation to streamline the regulations and to fast track decisions made on the validity of people's refugee application or international protection applications. Okay? So that was the initial reason given as to why we should sign up for this. Now, we haven't signed up for it yet, but Helen has gone on to tell you that while we're not waiting until we sign up, we've already gone about in imposing certain actions and in fleshing out the state bodies that deal with this sort of thing. If that is the case, she's just negated her initial point as to why we should sign up for this. Because the argument loosely was given that we're kind of hamstrung in what we can do until we sign up for this pact. While out of the other side of her mouth, she's telling you, while we haven't signed up for it yet, we've already imposed certain things that has allowed us to streamline our processes here for admitting people or for rejecting people, which would nullify the reason as to why you should sign up for the pact in the first place, okay?
Ensured over 3,000 doorstep operations were carried out on flights that pose a risk of irregular migration to the end of May this year, and legislation to increase fines on carriers from the current maximum of €3,000 to €5,000, and all of these changes have actually meant that in the last 2 years the number of people coming to our ports and airports without the correct documentation has reduced by 40%, and freeing up 100 Gardaí from back office roles to support immigration.
So look at all this stuff that she can do. Why wasn't this stuff done initially? Oh, she's only doing it now. Lunacy. So she was perfectly within her powers to enact all this stuff from the very get-go. And she floats the idea that the people arriving here with no documentation is down 40% or down to 40%. I'm misquoting her here, but I think she said down 40%. Grand. And what about the rest of the people? Those that did come here with no documentation, what are you doing with them?
Enforcement activities, and this includes deportations, and we have seen over recent months prosecutions of people arriving without appropriate documentation, and a significant number of those have also been imprisoned.
Okay, so look, if you know any statistics, or if you've ever had a statistics class, the first thing you're told about the word significant is that it's not used in the traditional sense or the colloquial sense that we'd all have. So significant to everyday chit-chat would be nearly bordering on a half. Okay, you kind of take it loosely like that. But in statistics, significant just means anything that moves the graph in any way, okay? So any variance from the midpoint. So if it's 1%, that's deemed statistically significant. It doesn't mean that it's a massive number. So what Helen does here is she doesn't give you the number. She tells you that there's a significant change or a significant increase in the volume of her doing her job appropriately. But significant could mean 1 or 2. It doesn't mean a grand number. So the words they use are slippery, and you need to catch the context in which they're using them. Because in the context of using the word significantly when dealing with numbers, she's absolutely telling the truth, even if it's 1 or 2 people. But the way the everyday man would perceive that outside of statistics would be, okay, she's got a handle on this. There's been a significant increase, which means it's a vast number in terms of the increase. And that's just not the case, okay? Because she hasn't given the numbers. So when they use words instead of numbers, open your eyes and ears a little bit wider and take in what's being said here, and walk around the idea that's been floated to you and have a look at it from different perspectives.
Continuing to look at additional measures that can be taken in the coming weeks. This includes continuing to ramp up investment in staffing and capacity. They have a memo of Cabinet setting out how we will hire 400 more staff to bring us in line and to ramp up the system from start to finish. A complete.
Now, what's interesting here is I would ask the question, which system are you speaking about, Helen? Because if her ideas of what is permissible and what is allowed to go on in this country, and you can base that on her actions and what she said and not done over the last few years, if that's opposed to what you want, then what she's saying might sound encouraging to you, but it might not actually be the case. So if she's intent on bringing in an endless stream of these people, then her speaking of hiring more people out of the taxpayers' purse, of course, and creating more of these state roles, then her speaking of ramping this up could be that she's alluding to increasing the ease in which these people can come here. And these 400 people that have been hired, they will be here to streamline the process of bringing these people in and making them quick citizens in this country, perfectly in time for a general election, of course. Okay, so you have to catch both meanings. So is she speaking from the worldview that you have, or is she speaking from her own worldview? You need to entertain both sides of this.
Review of additional safe countries in the coming weeks, extend restriction on visas to travel for certain countries, and complete a tender for charter airplanes to return unsuccessful applications.
Which countries? Because you can see that people, and it was spoken of as well by a couple of politicians, that Irish people returning from Australia or Canada or the Middle East or whatever the case is should be classed as the same as immigrants who are coming here from countries that have nothing to do with Ireland. So in terms of making it more difficult, making it more robust, they love that word, visa acquirement system, will that handicap some of the Irish people who are wanting to return home too? Okay.
All of this work is underway. All of this work is to make sure that we are ready to join the pact in 2 years' time. As I've said, pact presents us with an opportunity to completely reform, to re-engineer our system. And I would ask deputies opposing, what are your solutions? What are your plans?
Look, it's like silliness. Like, so she's just laid out a whole plethora of things that she can do to get a handle on the immigration issue, or on the influx of people coming here issue, outside of the EU pact. Then she's saying that in order to have any sort of a stranglehold on this situation, we need to join the pact. And then any people who doubt the pact, what are your suggestions? I would say to that our suggestions, or my suggestion would be, do your job, Helen. Do your job, and if you can't do your job or get in the people that are willing to do their job, then step aside. Otherwise, you're showing to the whole country that you are walking in lockstep with this whole situation, okay, which you've allowed over the last few years. So that's it for Helen.